the Deja Vu series. I'm so honored to have Elizabeth Yarnell with me. I have had her first cookbook since about 2007 or 2008 when I started on my health journey. And she has taught me so much about what healthy looked like. I didn't know how to cook healthy, Elizabeth, and you helped me with that. You started out with a diagnosis that you say was shared with you as a life sentence, and that was the diagnosis of MS. And that's what led you on this journey. Tell us
That is
about,
absolutely correct.
tell us about that diagnosis.
You know, it happened literally out of the blue overnight. One night I was up late in my apartment working on an article I was writing for the Denver Post on cross-country skiing. And I had been working on this article for a couple weeks, and I had gotten it into a pretty good shape in a draft. And I printed out my draft on my printer, and I was scanning it over as I was brushing my teeth. And I thought, okay, well, I see 3 spots in the text that I want to change, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. It's late. I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed. But the next morning, when I woke up and I set my pages next to my morning coffee, I couldn't even read the pages. It was almost like a leprechaun had stolen into my apartment during the night and taken an eraser and erased huge chunks of text from my pages. Even what I could make out, I couldn't really even understand. I wasn't sure what was going on. And so I went to the eye doctor, and he diagnosed me with optic neuritis, or inflammation of the optic nerve, and sent me right off to get an MRI. And when I came out of the MRI, that's when I received a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And I learned that 80% of MS patients experience significant disabilities within 10 years of diagnosis. So here I was 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, and learning that by my 40th birthday, I was probably going to be in a wheelchair.
That's terrifying. That would be terrifying to wake up one day and not be able to read something you wrote the night before. But
It
that's
was so scary because my whole life I had been about reading and writing, and now I couldn't even understand what what I could read, what I could make out on the paper. I couldn't even understand. And I remembered that I had seen 3 places I wanted to make changes in my text, and I could not locate them. And time was ticking and time was ticking. And I finally had to submit the article to my editor as it was, because I couldn't figure out where to make any edits. And this was my livelihood. And it's true. That editor never actually hired me again. But I was absolutely terrified, because I figured if I can't read and I can't write, I'm going to have to find a whole new profession. What am I going to do? I don't even know what to do if I can't read and can't write. And will this come back, or is this going to be the rest of my life?
so. I want to go back to the inflammation of the optic nerve because I have never heard of that before. And I had chronic inflammation, which is why I had joint pain and I had brain fog. But I wonder, with the amount of people who have chronic inflammation, how many may actually be suffering from inflammation of the optic nerve?
So anything that ends in itis, any diagnosis that you receive from a medical doctor that ends in itis, itis is medical speak for inflamed. So optic neuritis, inflammation of the optic nerve, or even appendicitis, inflammation of the appendix, or arthritis, inflammation of the joints, anything that ends in itis, gastritis, inflammation of the gastric cavity, really diagnoses that doctors give you are just names, a way to name what is happening. They don't tell you why they're happening or how do you fix it. They just tell you that, oh, your optic nerve is inflamed. And actually, optic neuritis is fairly common in the world of multiple sclerosis as a symptom, as is inflammation all over the body. And you're absolutely right. Brain fog is inflammation in the brain. What I have learned is that inflammation is systemic. So it goes everywhere the bloodstream goes. So I'd like to talk to people about, well, what is inflammation? Because often they say, well, I'm not inflamed. They're thinking of the kind of short-term inflammation, like when my ankle blew up like a softball when I twisted it in a jazzercise class. Yes, that is inflammation. That's the good kind of inflammation. That's what the body is supposed to do. It is inflammation to immobilize that joint and allow it to heal. And then that inflammation subsides as that body part heals. But really, what we're talking about today is that hidden inflammation. So, hidden inflammation in your head could look like brain fog. It could look like anxiety. It could look like panic attacks, depression. It could also look like headaches or migraines. Inflammation of the sinuses could look like runny or stuffy nose or chronic sinus infections or um, uh, postnasal drip, always having to clear your throat. Inflammation in the chest could look like asthma, could look like breathing issues, it could look like high blood pressure, could look like heart problems. Inflammation in the gut could look like acid reflux, could look like bloating or cramping when you eat or gas. Inflammation in the bowels could look like constipation or diarrhea or a mixture of both of those. Inflammation in our joints, we could call it fibromyalgia. It could be arthritis, another itis, right? Any type of inflammation that is called anything called itis, that means inflammation. So I really believe that most, if not all, symptoms that you may experience in the body, and a symptom is anything that is negative and not what it's supposed to be functioning in your body, are due to inflammation. Most, if not all, are due to inflammation. So the secret to health, I really believe, is reducing inflammation in the body and allowing the human body to do what it does best, which is work well in the absence of inflammation.
Yeah, I always say this is a self-healing organism that if we remove the interference, it can heal itself. So there's clearly a lot of interference that's causing us to have inflammation. And you've linked that to MS because you've reversed your symptoms. Do you consider that a reversing of the symptoms or the diagnosis?
So the term autoimmune, and MS is an autoimmune disease, as are so many, I think maybe 30% of people who have chronic conditions are diagnosed as autoimmune. And in medical terminology, the word autoimmune, if we take it apart, auto meaning self, immune meaning allergic, allergic to self. So many in the medical community will say, oh, if you're allergic to yourself, there's nothing we can do. You've become allergic to yourself. So sorry, go home. You live out the rest of your life being allergic to yourself. I think that's an absolute oxymoron. You cannot be allergic to yourself. Evolution says, nay, nay, you would have died out a long time ago. Instead, I believe that when there's inflammation in the body, there's always a trigger. And we have just not been looking in the right places to identify those triggers. And oftentimes those triggers are coming from the things that we're eating and the additives and the preservatives and the artificial ingredients in our food supply that has really been contaminated and polluted. That's exactly what I gave my 2014 TEDx talk about. And in fact, TEDx didn't want to even post it because what I said was so controversial. And they, after many, many months of lobbying, they finally posted it with a banner that says, TED doesn't agree with what I said.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't aware of that.
I'm like, you know what? That's fine. Just post it. Put your banner. I'm going to take that as a badge of honor.
Right. It's funny when we get close to the truth, the signs that we get that we're closer and closer to truth, right?
Right, right. And I really, that we evolved on this planet to eat and thrive on the foods and the plants and even the animals that are growing and evolving on this planet alongside of us. What we did not evolve to do was to process items or elements that are coming from 2 miles underneath the surface of the earth, because so many of these additives and preservatives, artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial fragrances, they're derived from petroleum products. They are deep, deep, deep down under the earth. This is not something that we evolved to have in our bodies and to be able to process out of our bodies. the way that the human body was designed to do. And it is incumbent upon ourselves to be aware of this because no one is watching out for us.
Well, I love the truth that you speak. And we have people now listening because they're setting New Year's resolutions and they want optimal health. And they might just be looking for weight loss. And, between you and I, Elizabeth, I think that the new normal is actually degraded health. And most people don't even know that they're in degraded health because they don't know how good they can feel until they experience that. But often it takes a diagnosis like MS, it takes a life sentence to wake some people up.
That is very, very true. And we don't even realize how much vitality we don't have. We are being attacked from all directions with toxins, and toxin overload is a huge issue for people in our world. I'm going to say not just our country, but in our world. If you live in a city, every time you walk outside the house, you're breathing in particulates from the pollution in our air. We are getting toxins from our water supplies. In our municipal water supplies, there are remnants of pharmaceuticals, of petrochemicals, of hormone modulators, of fertilizers and pesticides. All of these things are coming to us from all sides. It's very, very hard to get away from them. The Environmental Working Group did a study and found that they tested the cord blood of newborn babies across the country. And at the moment of birth, these babies already had more than 200 chemicals inside their bloodstreams. The deck is stacked against us.
Yes, I remember the first time I did that research and was terrified at the amount of chemicals. Like they found Agent Orange is in the cord blood of newborn. Like, wasn't that banned in the 80s? So does that mean that our body can't get rid of it? Or is it still being used maybe under a different name? Because we see things like that, like Teflon, when they said they would stop producing Teflon and they closed the plant in Virginia, but then opened a plant in North Carolina and just changed the name. They changed the color. It went from black to gray. And they say it's not Teflon, but now we're seeing the same cancer rates. And there was a documentary on that. So we are misled on things like Agent Orange is banned. Well, how come it's still showing up in cord blood of babies? Which I think is why I'm so passionate about detoxification, because we have to be detoxing with the amount of toxins and chemicals. And I know that was part of your journey with MS.
It is, and it was, and it still is to this day. I still work on detoxing. So I like to think about the immune system like a bucket. And into this bucket of our immune system goes all the insults and assaults of daily life. And that includes everything from stress and lack of sleep to alcohol to pharmaceutical drugs to pollution to food additives and all of these ingredients that are in our food that aren't really actually ingredients. And all of these things go into this immune system bucket. And when they're in the bucket, our immune system works to process them and push them out to eliminate them from the human body because they are not welcome. They're not nutritive into our body. But when that bucket gets full, it starts to tip over. And that's when we tip over into chronic symptoms or chronic inflammation, otherwise known as autoimmunity. And once that bucket is full and it's spilling out over the top, it is very hard. It takes extraordinary amounts of effort to bring that level back down to where you can have a sustainable life where you are not having symptoms all the time. You are not tipping over and your immune system can process everything that's coming into your world. And it takes effort to do that. And most people don't know how to bring that out. And that is a big part of what I do, the work that I do in my clinic.
Yeah, it's interesting how we had to walk the path so that we could help other people. I do believe that some of us were given the assignment, the divine assignment to walk this path, because this is a path that's scary for many people. They get a diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder, disease, I have someone in my family who believes that there is no reversing this. The doctors have told her you cannot reverse an autoimmune disease. And yes, that her body has turned against her. And MS, that's another really scary, terrifying diagnosis. But you help people with both of these, and you've had tremendous success with
I
clients.
do. I focus on MS a lot, but really, I believe that any autoimmune disease is really the same. Chronic inflammation is the same. It doesn't matter how it's been named or how it manifests, whether it manifests in optic neuritis or it manifests in arthritis or it manifests in diabetes or kidney failure, whatever, however it's manifesting, it's still the same foundation of rampant inflammation in the body. And so when people call me up and they contact me and they say, well, do you work with this condition, ankylosing spondylosis or something? And I'm like, well, again, that osis, right, meaning inflammation. And I like, it doesn't matter. If there's inflammation, that's great because we can deal with inflammation. We know how to do this. The conventional medical world, not so much. They're really focused on pharmaceuticals. That's their education. If you go to medical school, you learn how to prescribe pharmaceuticals for palliative care, which means not healing, but relief from the pain of the symptoms, not healing, just relief, and surgeries, interventions. If you can't figure out how to fix it, pull it out, cut it out. Right? But neither of those approaches are really good for people who are suffering from chronic issues over lengths of time. That calls for a different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was going to get carpal tunnel surgery for my wrist pain,
Oh,
but then the ankle pain was so bad. So that was at 26 years old. And at 26 years old, they said, well, we don't know what's causing the pain in your ankles. Just take Advil for that. And I'm like, every day, my ankles hurt. My ankles are starting to hurt like my wrists. And so they're like, we'll schedule your carpal tunnel surgery, but just take Advil for your ankles. And I was like, something seems off here. That was inflammation. And I'm with you. I think that inflammation manifests differently for different people. And until they reduce the inflammation, they don't even know how good they can feel.
it's true. You have no memory of how you felt before because this is just life at this level. And you don't remember, oh, you know what? Life could be way up here and so much better. And when I help people remove the inflammation from their body, it's almost like the veil falls from in front of their eyes, like the world becomes more vibrantly colored and more exciting and more optimism and more opportunities. I had one client, she was in her late 20s. She was a corporate attorney, so she very, very busy, smart woman. But she had migraines every single day pretty much since she was 14. And when we brought her through my program, we were able to narrow down the things that were causing the inflammation in her body, causing her to have these migraines. The first 2 weeks of the program, first 13 days, she had a migraine every single day. Day 14, she didn't have a migraine. And then she stopped having migraines. And she realized that one of the things that she had been doing was every afternoon she would have a kind of a crash in the afternoon and she would go down to the vending machine in her building and get a Snickers bar. And that was a big part of her problem. The peanuts and the high fructose corn syrup were killing her. So, but to come back to what happens when you reduce that inflammation, within like 2 months, she had gotten a huge promotion at work. She had met the man of her dreams and gotten engaged. Like all of these things, like in her life, started coalescing once she reduced the inflammation in her body.
Oh my God, I love that. This is why I started working with kids, because after watching the transformation with adults for a number of years, I realized one, the information isn't getting to kids, but the cards are really stacked against them because they don't really know anything other than the boxed food, processed food, because that's what they're fed at the schools. Not coming from a judge, I'm not judging anybody. I raised my kids on box foods and drive-throughs. But the kids aren't being shown anything different. And that's really what led me to start teaching kids.
Yes, I think you're right. And it's it can be so dramatic with the kids too. My kids were my guinea pigs as well. And I remember my son was such a miserable and unhappy and angry kid for the first 6 years of his life because he was in so much discomfort. He had chronic constipation. Sometimes he would go 2 weeks between poops. He had chronic vomiting. He would vomit like 7 to 20 times a week. And he was 6 years old. So it wasn't like he was just a baby at this time. He was just vomiting all the time. And we took him to pediatric GI clinics and we had his DNA mapped and we even had his abdominal cavity x-ray to make sure there wasn't anything anatomically going on there. And no one could help us. The best that the medical community could offer was Miralax. And by the end of this journey, the one thing I knew for sure was he was not allergic to Miralax or not deficient in Miralax. He'd had so much Miralax, he's not deficient in Miralax. That's not helping at all. And that chronic inflammation was just so taxing and devastating on him that once we figured out that it was his diet, like for him, some of his most inflammatory foods turned out to be the foods we thought were healthiest for him, like lemon, garlic, and broccoli. But we did food sensitivity testing, found those out, changed his diet. At this point, he was 6.5. He had fallen off the height and weight charts. I was feeling such a failure as a mom because I'm like, this my child is going to die young because he can't poop. He can't get rid of the toxins in his body through his poop, and he's falling off everything. He's failure to thrive. Once we changed his diet, within 2 months, he had gained 15 pounds. He had grown 2.5 inches. He started pooping freely. When I really, really knew that he was recovered was when one day I walked by his bedroom and I heard him singing to himself.
Oh my God.
And he had never been happy enough to sing to himself.
Right.
So, I mean, just really, that was the moment when I realized this is what I want to do for the rest of my life is help people understand how their foods are affecting them and causing inflammation in their body that's taking away from their quality of life.
Wow. And I was telling you about the Miralax studies because my nephew was put on Miralax, and so many kids now are suffering from constipation. And there's a link between Miralax and seizures. So my nephew started having seizures. He was on Miralax for 2 years and started having seizures like at age 10. So the drugs just all seem to have other side effects and just cause more issues. So that really needs to be the last resort, especially when we know we can fix things through diet and lifestyle.
Exactly. Because as I said, drugs are just a band-aid. They don't address the root of the problem.
Yeah,
They don't
and that's what I'm
heal.
about. I'm about root cause.
They just um they're palliative. So if you take, say, a Tylenol for a headache, well, that's fine. It may relieve your headache, but it's not going to address why you had the headache in the first place. So tomorrow you might have a headache again because you didn't address the problem that's there to begin with.
Just take Advil every day. Then you'll end up in kidney failure and on
Oh my
dialysis.
God.
I
And
mean,
even our pharmaceuticals are full of ingredients that are reactive for a lot of people. The red tea on a Tylenol capsule is enough red food dye for a sensitive person to affect them and cause more inflammation in their body. And if you look at the ingredients labels on many medications, they put in a lot of fillers. It could be corn, it could be rice, it could be magnesium stearate, which is a petroleum product. There's all sorts of fillers that they put in what we think of as harmless over-the-counter drugs.
right. Oh, it's just such a travesty. I mean, where we are today and the lack of awareness So here we are setting New Year's resolutions and we think we just want to lose weight. I always say weight is just one symptom or indicator of our health. But if this is where you're starting, by all means, then start with reducing inflammation. You will get all of these other health benefits in addition to losing weight.
Well, even the medical community is now starting to consider obesity as excessive inflammation. So really the whole formula of calories in versus calories out that we've been taught all these years is flawed. It's not about calories in versus calories out, and you cannot survive on a very, very low calorie diet. That's not a good thing to do either. We need to have our cells be able to function, and they can't do that without the right nutrients. Really what the formula is, it's not really a formula, but the secret is are those calories that you are eating, are they inflammatory for you? And if they are artificial, petroleum based, synthetically made in laboratories, odds are high they may be. And all of those meal replacement packets and synthetic foods that are on the market, especially in the weight loss arena, just turn my stomach.
Yes, and I ate all those. I fed my family all of those for years. So I understand trying to move to whole foods. I remember what it was like trying to figure that out. So that's why we're bringing all of us together and all of these resources. So the listeners can reach out, they can book a consultation with you, they can get your cookbook. And I know you're working on another book, which you're going to autograph for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So, I wrote my cookbook I started it in 2001, published the first version in 2005, and now it's sold more than 70,000 copies. But I went to my agent in 2011 and I said, I'm ready to write my next book. And she said, great. Is it another cookbook? And I said, no, I don't want to write another cookbook. I want to write a book on inflammation. And she said, nobody's going to buy a book on inflammation. What people want from you is a cookbook. So I didn't write the book, but now here I am, more than a decade later, I'm finally writing the book that I wanted to write.
Oh, good for you. So many people. I hope that everyone gleaned some insight from this of what is inflammation and what chronic inflammation leads to, and that none of these diagnoses are a life sentence. If they can walk away with that, you were given, your doctors wanted you to believe it was a life sentence, but you didn't take it as a life sentence.
It's true. And even when I asked my doctors, well, what can I do to make it better? They said nothing. There's nothing you can do.
Well, you're living proof.
Here I am 23 years past diagnosis, and I like to say I'm still wearing heels, not wheels.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh. I hope everyone found this insightful. We went a little long with the interview, but it's only because Elizabeth has so much wisdom in this space. So please reach out, contact her, work with her as your coach, and definitely purchase her books. Elizabeth, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been such a pleasure as always. I love connecting with you. I do want to invite any of our listeners to check out their own inflammation score and see if hidden inflammation could be affecting their life in a negative way. And you can do that at inflammationinvestigator.com.
Oh, I love that. That's easy to remember. All right. We'll make sure we include the link here in the emails so everybody has access to that.
Thank you.
Right. Well, until next time, farewell.